So welcome to part 2 of my little series, 12 Steps for Everyone, where I tried to ask, can the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous be useful for ordinary people? I think they can. Now, if we look at the wording of step 2 as follows, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That sounds very archaic and not particularly relevant for ordinary people in 2026. Right? I'm going to argue that's not the case. I'm going to argue it's more relevant than ever. Firstly, we are not exactly overdosing on sanity right now, collectively, as a society. This is sanity in this sense, as the 12-step programs meant it, means seeing the world, seeing things in a relatively non-delusory way. So first of all, we have to get past the moral relativism and the people that jump up and down and say, no man, it's my truth versus your truth. Well, not really. The Buddhists didn't see it that way, funnily enough. You know, most of the people that say that sort of thing are great fans of Buddhism and philosophies like that instead of more reactionary philosophies as they would see Christianity or Stoicism. But the Buddhists didn't believe that at all. Buddha thought absolutely there's an objective way of seeing the world in a less delusory way than other ways, and that way was meditation. Through meditation techniques outlined in the sutras, one becomes mindful and gains insight into the true nature of reality, which is that nothing whatsoever should be clung to. That, I think, is the best way of defining the Buddha's beliefs, and it's a famous, how would you say, condensation of the teachings by a Thai Buddhist master called Puttata, who condensed the Buddha's teachings down into one central teaching. Nothing whatever should be clung to. This sentiment is extremely similar to 12-step philosophy, step 3 in particular, which we'll do in the next video. But to come back to the point, truth is not really relative. I think we need to agree on that before we would even bother with working the 12 steps in this manner. Step 2 is to do with trying to find sanity or truth, or at least living in a less delusory way, if possible. Now, the reason we need to do this is because, don't forget, in step 1, we were involved in trying to find how to move forward when we have a problem we cannot fix. That's what step 1 does. Obviously, with addicts, very obvious to see the problem they cannot fix. By definition, an addict's drug of choice is a problem he cannot fix. If he could fix it, then by definition, in the terms, he would not be an addict. So it's easy to see with an addict when they're bent over double on the high street, high as a kite on fentanyl, and they can't stop. Not so easy to see in an ordinary person. But let's say the business that has gone beyond the point of being rescued, the marriage that has just naturally gone beyond the point of being rescued, a loved one passing away. Do I have a life after this? How do I recover? These are problems that you cannot fix, as we studied in that video under the dichotomy of control. There are things that are under our control, things that are not. For addicts, addiction is such a problem. Ordinary people have similar problems. They absolutely do. And step 1 helps us to admit that this problem we've got is in that category, cannot be fixed. That brings us to step 2, where we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, or happiness, or good living, or being centered, or being on the right path, or whatever you want to call it. So we're being invited to find something that's stronger than ourselves, that's more than the sum of its parts, that's bigger than us, because we admitted we couldn't do it. And there are a number of human scenarios where that will be the case. And some of the strongest humans will find themselves in those scenarios. And some of the most experienced humans will tell you what that's like. So sanity is an objectively less delusory way of looking at the world. Now let's come to the first part of the phrase, belief. We came to believe. What does that mean? Well, belief's an odd thing, isn't it? If you think about it, belief is a light that never goes out. It's like a lighthouse. It can't go out. If you're breathing and you have all your cognitive faculties about you, then you will be believing. If you're breathing, you're believing, unless you're in a coma or you've had a head injury or something. Again, people would jump up and say, no, what about the nihilists? They don't believe in anything. They do. They just believe like firmly in the hopelessness of all things. They have very, very strong, fervent beliefs that life is pointless. That's a belief. That's a position. So all humans that are conscious and thinking have a position on things. In other words, they have a belief about things. Now, this step is inviting us to think, what do I believe in? So if the question in step 1 was, which things am I accepting that I should be changing? And which things am I trying to change that I should be accepting? That dichotomy of control. Then this step is, what do I believe in? And do I believe that I can be helped? Do I believe that there's a solution? And if the answer is yes, you can proceed to finding the power by which that solution would come about. But the very first bit is to ask yourself, do I believe that I can be helped? Do I believe there's a solution here? And perhaps, what do I believe? Right? So, if I were to say, yes, I really believe that I can stop smoking, then it becomes possible. Arguably, it's not possible otherwise. So there's two sides to this. I have to believe, but then as we've just acknowledged, because I'm a nicotine addict, I can't stop. By definition, I can't stop. Therefore, I believe I can stop, but I can't do it on my own. And now I need another power, something that's higher than me, more powerful than me. And we can go into what the original founders of 12-step movements considered that to be. But before we do that, let's just acknowledge that there are higher power. Like with belief, this kind of force in your life is an eternal flame. If you haven't got a higher power, you've probably got a lower power. So if you're an addict, your lower power is your drug of choice. It has power. If it didn't have power, you wouldn't be using it. It's a bullet. You know, it gets stuff done. It's a resource. It's an inner resource. It's a suit of armor. It's balls. It's energy. It's a resource. It makes you more adaptive. It makes you temporarily fitter in evolutionary terms. So drugs are a power. They're just a lower power, right? So if you don't have that lower power, then obviously you need to find another power. For other people, they'll have similar lower powers. You know, they rely on shortcuts, dodgy black hat stuff to get their business moving, things which will eventually come back to haunt them. But everybody needs power. Now, the original founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill W. in particular, Bill Wilson, was they were very clear about what a higher power could and probably couldn't be. And you might be surprised because AA in particular has a reputation of being a cult. I'm going to argue that it's not a cult because cults usually have an agreed definition of God. And as we'll see in step 3, that is precisely proscribed in 12 steps. You are not required to follow any specific definition of God. It's a God as you understand it, right? So Bill W. was via other early alcoholics, very much under the influence of Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was very much steeped in other intellectuals of his age, like Emil Durkheim or William James, another psychologist, William James. So these types of thinkers were very influential on early AA. And Carl Jung was quite adamant that addiction, this is what he told the early AAs. I've done another video about this called Carl Jung friend of the addict. But the early AAs were told in no uncertain terms that addiction is a spiritual illness. There's no solution for it other than a spiritual solution, right? So only a spiritual experience can cure addiction. Now, they mean that in the widest possible sense. You might imagine it as something like an attitudinal shift. It doesn't necessarily need to be a road to Damascus type experience or some kind of religious conversion. It's a profound change of belief, yeah, as per what we're discussing here. And so quite obviously the ordinary person could also have a profound change of belief or an attitudinal shift when they're faced with a problem they can't fix, and then they invite themselves to ask themselves, do I believe there's a solution here? And if so, radically change their perspective. That in itself is an introduction of a new type of power. They were also quite clear that it didn't have to be instantaneous. You know, this growth, this spiritual growth can be gradual, or what William James called the educational variety of spiritual experience. Many alcoholics and indeed and addicts and ordinary people obviously are agnostic. They are not spiritual believers. So this higher power isn't necessarily going to be God in the classic sense of the word, and there's no reason why it should be. And the original, and that step is not asking you to do that. It's asking you to consider, is there a power greater than yourself? And this is the one that, this is the famous example for people who are agnostic and struggling with this within 12-step movements in addiction, is, could God be good orderly direction? A group of drunks, you know, a group of other alcoholics who can guide you and help you. And for ordinary people, you know, that could be like a council of elders type thing. Have many advisors, have people older than you, and ask their opinion and take their opinions on board. Check your thinking always on big decisions with people you trust. Obviously, it has to be people you trust. Can't be idiots, otherwise you'll wind up in a worse situation than you're in now. But seek and ye shall find. You know, when you want guidance, when you really, really ask for it, lo and behold, don't be surprised if such people who can advise you show up. And when they do, though, use them. Use them as a higher power. So our higher power can be the group consciousness, or in the language of 12 steps, it would be group conscience. So we often don't take decisions on our own. We seek a group solution and then apply that solution. And that takes away the frailties of the individual, the vulnerabilities of the individual. And it's humbling, it's a more humble way of dealing with things. Because when there are many problems we cannot fix alone, we must have more brains on the subject, more hands-on. We need help. And it's obviously a humble thing to ask for help in the first place. So a power greater than yourself needn't be God. It can be a number of other more practical things. I think once you start to really get involved in the 12-step way of life, you'll find that you're invited to investigate that spiritual path a lot more deeply. But initially, it's just the acknowledgement of the fact that I'm not solving this on my own. I need reinforcements or a power greater than myself. And that could, of course, be a human power. It doesn't need to be something mystic or divine. And in doing so, we come to see the world or things in a less delusory way. We believe that change is possible, help is possible, there is a solution to this problem, I just can't find it. I've hit the limits of my will, I'm not finding the solution. But I do believe that with more power brought to bear on the situation, it can be solved. And then we are in a saner place. So that, in essence, is step 2. I hope that's clear. We don't need to believe fantastical things like the Buddha and most of the Stoics, and indeed, I think, if you examine it in the Gospels, Christ himself, in some instances, we're invited to investigate things for ourselves. Do your own research. If you can't believe in something because it seems fantastical and ludicrous, well then don't believe in it. Find another thing that you think is powerful that you can believe in. The goal, I think, is to not rely on self, is to not continue to rely on self, and that has not been working as per the step one learning that we had. We realized that we have been going about it the wrong way and we cannot fix this problem. When we realize that, we're in a step one place. We've seen our powerlessness. Then, because we're powerless, obviously step two comes into play. We must find a higher power. But do we even believe in it? Do we believe it can work? We must believe that before it can work, but we won't get anywhere on our own. And now, if we can do that, we're reaching a place of greater sanity. So I hope that makes sense.